Alright, welcome back. This is where we're going to start getting into actually building out that network. And the first thing that we got to start with is our Active Directory / our domain controller. Most of the time this is going to be on the same server, and that's part of the reason why it's in the single presentation here. So let's go over some of the things that we need to talk about first before we actually build out this network, or this Active Directory server at least, and then we can actually physically do it. So here we go. First thing we got to talk about is domains. On a high level, from a conceptual standpoint, it's a group of users, devices, and services that belong to the same network. So within your domain, you can have your DHCP server, you can have a file server, you can have a bunch of users, you can have a bunch of groups. In the event, we'll go over domain trust a little bit more later on in the course, towards the end in fact, how you can integrate someone else's domain into your own domain through a domain trust. And what that's going to allow you to do is give you access to the resources of that other domain. And you might want to do this, or this happens relatively frequently if you have merging companies is a good example of that, where they don't necessarily want to reconfigure or recreate the networks that they have from scratch, where it'd be significantly easier just to trust the domain and move forward. So that is a high-level overview of domains. For the most part, you don't have to really understand precisely what those differences are, but just understand that it is there. You do need to know that it exists, and then when you need to dive into that topic a little bit more for whatever condition that you find yourself in, you have the ability to do so. The last thing I need to point out about domains is that Microsoft calls their domains a forest. And this is just a conceptual term, and yeah, it just all your devices and services are considered trees at that point. But a domain is considered a forest for Microsoft. And when you're going through and creating your own domain, it'll ask you, hey, is this the root of the forest? So let's move on from there. Active Directory. This stores your user information, right? So this is network authentication, essentially. Typically speaking, your domain controller in Active Directory is the same server. This can change, obviously, but typically speaking, your DC is going to be with your Active Directory. Bigger networks are going to have redundancy in some way when it comes to your domain controller. For our use case and starting out for a intro to network admin type of course, we're not going to have redundant Active Directory because of the resource limitations that we find ourselves with. So yeah, let's move on from there. Just remember that Active Directory is an authentication service for Microsoft environments. It functions off of the LDAP protocol, and that's a protocol that can be used as Linux as well. So Active Directory is a little bit, it is not equivalent to LDAP. It uses the LDAP protocol, but it is a little bit different. So we're going to go over how to install Active Directory at this point. What the purpose of showing you these slides are is to show you visually what to expect, and it gives me an opportunity to explain some of these things, and then when we physically go through and do it on our VM, you've at least seen what the procedure actually should be. So if you fall behind, you can catch up yourself, and then you can also use this as a reference as needed. So installing Active Directory, after you have your VM up and running, go ahead and go to New Roles and Features, which is right here. And then all of this in here, before you begin, installation type and server selection, just click through these because there's only one option, and we're going to install it on this server. So these three options, you just click through and next. When you get to server role, make sure you have Active Directory domain service clicked, and then we're going to hit next. Okay. And then features, AD, and confirmation. Also, you don't have to worry about too much because it's going to be a standard procedure, so hit next through those. And then results, make sure you have something along these lines to see if it's actually installing or not. So configuring at this point, we need to promote an Active Directory and domain controller to the position of domain controller. So basically, hey, this is the first networking device or first server that is on our domain. So if you create in the scenario that you try to create a Active Directory server separate from a domain controller, the domain controller is going to get promoted to your primary domain controller. Okay, so we're going to have to add a new forest, as I was talking about before, because we're creating a new domain, add a forest name, and then restore password mode as well. So if we come over here, notice that Active Directory and domain services is right here off to the left. So if we click on that and activate it, we're going to get this message down here that post deployment configuration is still necessary. So you can hit this, click right here, which most people will do. You can also come up here to the flag and do that as well, or right here. So you got some few options to get to that point, but most people click on this. Okay, deployment configuration. So configuration, we're going to add a new forest because we don't have a domain. We're going to add a root name. We have Final Fantasy here. Okay, so we're going to stick with that for my presentation. You can name your domain whatever you want, whatever makes sense for you. Just remember, if you do something different, it's going to be different for you than it is for me. So as we move on, we're going to get a DNS warning. That's okay. We don't have a DNS server yet, so we can skip this. Okay. That BIOS name, make sure it's Final Fantasy. Paths, choose all your defaults because we don't have anything special going on yet. So make sure these are all the defaults. Okay, prerequisite checks. Make sure this goes, and you should be fine with this if you're doing it the way I am. And that's the end of the presentation. So let's actually physically go ahead and do this. Okay, so first things first, I got to show you what is going on with this little setup here. So over here to the right, this is group 1. So client 1's on top, client 2 is on the bottom. So this is going to represent our Final Fantasy VIII characters. So we're going to create a new group eventually when that comes, probably a little later. And then group 2, and then client 1's up top here, and then group 2, client 2 is on the bottom over here on the left, and then obviously our domain controller is right here in the center, which is our server. So we're going to add roles and features. Okay, before you begin, I'm going to give you a couple information. We're going to install a role server selection. It's the only one on here. Now, I am noticing that my server name is the default Windows nonsense. So one of the things that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and change that just so I can understand it a little bit better for the future when we start using DNS servers. So I'm going to come over here to System, and I right-clicked on that Windows icon. All right, I'm going to come over here to Change Setting, Computer Description, DC1 for computer description. I'm going to come down here to the change button, and then I'm going to change the computer name. So Bahamut. Okay, this makes sense to me for the theme that I'm going with. You can name this anything that you want, whatever makes sense to you, and you can even obviously call this domain server or domain controller or Active Directory server, whatever makes sense for you, but this makes sense for me, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. I'm going to click OK here. Okay, you must restart to apply the changes, which makes sense to me. I'm going to apply, and then I'm going to restart later, and I'll restart this server eventually. So I'm going to come down here. We are going to close this because we don't need it anymore. We're still going to install on this. We still need Active Directory domain services. We're going to add the features here. And essentially what that just said was that, hey, if you want to add this role, you need all these other features as well. So if we come down to the Features tab after clicking Next, you can add more features as you need them if you need a custom solution for something. So if I needed IAS for some reason, I can add it here. So next. Okay. Message about Active Directory domain services. I'm going to click this, restart the destination server if you need to. I don't remember if it needs restarting or not for a new domain controller. We're about to find out here in a second. So I'm going to come down here, hit this install button. Here we go. This shouldn't take long at all. Okay, close. And notice that we have our little flag icon up here. And then if I come down to Active Directory, ADDS, we still get that message about, hey, we need the post configuration, okay? So one thing I'm noticing is that since I have this clicked, I do not see that link down here where it allows us to go directly to that domain configuration. So we have this one here, and we have this one up here as well. Okay, so I'm going to promote this to domain controller. All right, I'm going to come down here to add new forest. Forest name, I'm still going to call this Final Fantasy. Okay, .com. Next. Okay, Windows Server 2016, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, password. Here we go. Okay, there's that DNS warning that I was talking about. We can go ahead and ignore this. This is going to auto-populate to Final Fantasy for our NetBIOS name. There we go. Paths, it's going to be defaults. There we go, default paths. Next there's going to be review options, which this is all standard procedure at this point, so we're going to go ahead and hit next here. Okay, got a warning here, one of the prerequisites, verification prerequisite domain, promotion failed. Okay, name change pending. So we changed the name of the server, so we're going to have to come back and do this here in a second. Yes, we're going to cancel, and then we're going to restart. So restarting a Windows server is going to take a little bit longer than what it does for clients, and that's mostly because of the services that it has to do. So later on, when we have more services on this server, then we will have those restart times are going to take a lot longer. So let's wait for this to load, and then we're going to come up here again. We're going to promote this server to domain controller, and then we're going to go through the same process again. So can I select? Final Fantasy.com. Oh, wrong one. Here we go. Create a new one. There's that. Next. Server, okay, password. Okay, DNS warning again. Again, this is going to auto-populate to Final Fantasy. There it is. Okay, default paths. Next. Prerequisite check. We should be good to go on this. We shouldn't get an error, but we'll find out. Okay, just some warnings. Okay, and NT4. Okay, so we're doing good here. We're going to install. Okay, so we're going to have to restart here because of the Active Directory service. So this server is going to restart, and then we're going to have to log in as administrator, but it's going to be directly on the domain controller. So let's give this a couple seconds. Okay, so we are back now. That took a significant amount of time, probably about 3 minutes for me. Could be significantly longer for you depending on your hardware. So, but what I do want to do is I want to point out that here's our NetBIOS name. It's Final Fantasy now. And we are also logging in as the administrator. So if we come through here, use the password that we set for the administrator on this domain. Okay, and we're going to have Server Manager pull up. There we go. All right, and I don't see any warnings. So, well, except for these, but we'll get to that eventually. But Active Directory is officially working now. So that's going to do it for this one, and I will see you in the next one.